It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of gum.
Okay, released for DOS-compatible PCs in 1991, it's the original Duke Nukem, and I talked about this in the first episode of the truly excellent series Video World, Stuart Jip in Video World. That's me, I'm Stuart Jip, and you can watch that on my channel, which is what this is on right now. Anyway, enough plugging. Yeah, as I said, I talked about it on Video World 1, and I'm probably going to end up repeating myself now, so I'll keep it relatively brief, but it's a sort of inauspicious start for the character. He doesn't really stand out too much, and he's wearing a sort of strange sort of pink tank top in this, which is, you know, nothing wrong with pink, but it's just a little bit unusual for the image he would end up portraying, which was the ultimate sort of hyper macho ridiculous parody of Machismo that he ultimately would be. Well, whereas this is just a rather well-made Apogee style platform game, one of their best ones in my opinion. There's a really boxy feel to the level design, which some people won't get on with, and there's a sort of maze-like quality, which also I know people don't dig in platform games. It's not very console style. It probably wouldn't have hit console without heavy modification, but there's quite a lot to get your teeth into. It's quite challenging. There's a lot of secrets. The level design in the first episode especially is very strong, but it falls into a really sort of classic Apogee game trap, which is that the unregistered shareware episode is always much stronger than the registered stuff. That's always the case, though. There's almost always the case with shareware games, and yeah, lots to do. Lots as you carry on through the game, you can power up your weapon. Although there is only one gun, you can just modify how many bullets you can have on the screen, up to about 4, I believe, which gives you extremely rapid-fire weaponry. Lots of odd little gimmicky things, like there's soda cans, and when you shoot them they fly off in towards space, and if you collect them before you shoot them they give you 1 health, and if you shoot them and then collect them while they're flying through the air, you don't get any health back, but you get quite a large points bonus. There are also chicken legs, where if you shoot them they turn into full roast chickens, which is utterly bizarre, but just it's full of interesting stuff like that. Like, there are balloons you can collect, but if you accidentally shoot them, you pop them, you don't get the significant point bonus from them. And as you journey through the game, you can also unlock objects such as, the only one that's springing to mind right now is you can get a grappling hook, which just lets you cling to certain platforms. And there's one other as well, but frankly it's escaping me, and I'm not posting the effort picture, the integrity picture, but I can't be bothered to check, because I didn't manage to get that far on this playthrough, and I've played through this game many times. Oh dear. Anyway, good stuff, and a good start for the series. Not exactly huge, standout, amazing, but definitely a good start. Duke Nukem 2, also for DOS compatibles, released in 1993, is visually a step up, although not aesthetically in my opinion. The gameplay is much the same, and it's about as stiff, but in the first game the stiffness and the graphical stiffness kind of matched each other, so the game felt right, if that makes sense. Once again, this is something I talk about in Video World quite a lot, but in my opinion, this is my slightly mental theory on graphics and how they interact with game design, I suppose. If a game has bad graphics, but it also has weird, sticky gameplay, I'm a lot more inclined to try with it. But if I have a game that looks beautiful but has stiff as hell controls, then it just feels wrong and bad. And to be honest, Duke Nukem 2 is an example of that. The gameplay isn't really strictly much different. There are a few more weapons, and the view is kind of more zoomed in. The level design is similar. It's not I would say not quite as interesting, but there's a little bit less reliance on mazes, which is nice, I suppose. And the difficulty is a lot higher. But that's, to be honest, a lot of that is due to the zoomed-in view and the sort of lack of precision that comes with having the less grid-based level layouts. But really, ultimately, I think it's a game that its aesthetics don't match its gameplay, which to me is bad. And it was a thing that was wrong with a lot of DOS platformers. They all looked a bit shit, but they managed to tailor the gameplay in a way that fit. To me, that's why so many of the DOS platformers are so unlike PC games, because for whatever reason, I don't really understand graphic formats, but for whatever reason, PCs just couldn't make games that looked as smooth as consoles back then, and they just weren't. Platform games just felt weird and different, and sometimes they made that work, like with the original Jazz Jackrabbit, which is a fantastic game. The original Duke Nukem, I would say, and quite a few other Apogee games like Realms of Chaos and Crystal Caves feel really good, though they don't look very good, but they feel good because they look how they feel. They feel how they look. It makes sense. But Duke Nukem 2, not really one of them. A bit of a downer, really. Although there are a couple of worse games to come, but I can't really recommend this one. I mean, give it a go, and maybe you'll disagree with me entirely, but I think it's just a muddled and flawed game.
Damn, those alien bastards are gonna pay for shooting up my ride.
Duke Nukem 3D, released in 1996 for DOS PC, is well, it's a real classic. Like, everyone knows this game. Who was around back then? I suppose a lot of people even now who weren't. It was the first FPS to have sort of proper vertical sections. I mean, I'm not saying that with any confidence, actually. It feels as though it was. I know there was some vertical stuff in Doom 2, but it was all the same Doom engine, sort of, you can't have stuff stacked on other stuff kind of thing. But in Duke Nukem 3D, you very much had a lot of verticality to the game, which was enhanced by the fact that you could get like a jetpack, which you could enable at any time. And it was an example of, similar to the old Raven software game Heretic, you could go through an inventory and equip a bunch of useful items and objects. Like there's something called a Hollow Duke, where you can drop it and enemies will focus their fire on that instead of you. You can take steroids to run faster. Yeah, it's kind of an edgy game for its time. Like lots of ladies with few clothes and strippers and things like that, like steroids and really grim things like I'm gonna rip your head off and shit down your neck, which he then proceeds to do. There's a lot of interactivity, which is probably what sort of gives this game the most of its identity. There's a lot of weird stuff you can do, like you can destroy a fire hydrant and drink from that for like 1 health point per second, or even you can destroy a toilet and drink from that, which is gross, but it's free health. Sort of areas like where you go into the movie theatre and you can play a video of, you guessed it, a bare lady. It's just a lot of weird interactive things that weren't really around in earlier FPSs. They just didn't have that stuff. If I can criticise it, I would say, personally, I think it's a little bit too hard on the most default difficulty. Like, almost all the enemies are what they call hit scan enemies, which means if they can see you when they fire, they'll probably hit you. There's no like projectile that you can dodge with a lot of them. And like the two main enemies, the alien troopers and the pig cops, both have hit scan weapons, and the pig cops in particular can do a lot of damage with their shotguns, and it's sometimes difficult to find exactly where you're being shot at from before you're dead. So not ideal, but it's great. It is good, and it's important as well, and it sort of paved the way for Quake, and the build engine which the game was made in went on to be used in games like Shadow Warrior and Blood, which in my opinion are slightly superior, especially Blood, which is amazing, and maybe one day I'll talk about it on some sort of video. But yeah, Duke Nukem 3D, constantly re-released and really easy to get hold of on almost any system that you could care to name made in the last 20 years or so. It's very hard to think of a version of this game that I would consider to be substandard. The N64 version is great, even the PS1 version is pretty good, so you can't really go wrong. But overall, I think I would personally recommend either the PC Megaton version, which is sadly no longer available, or the current World Tour Edition, which makes the game actually into true 3D while not sacrificing the look or feel of the game, and it's a good addition to the game. Released in 1998 for the PS1, Duke Nukem Time to Kill is a very interesting game, in my humble opinion. I was incredibly pleasantly surprised by how good this one was. I played it as a kid, but only with a friend, and only on multiplayer, which is this surprisingly enjoyable 1v1 versus mode, where we'd make up our own sort of little games to go in there, because it's kind of limited, but when you're small you get the mileage out of whatever game. But no, this is a really good one, and I was alarmed at how much fun I had with it when I went to it for this video. The game is basically, if this was reviewed, and it presumably was, in the UK PS1 magazines at the time, they probably would have called it Duke Raider, because it's very much just Tomb Raider with a sort of Duke Nukem skin, though it has the all action stuff from Duke Nukem 3D, and there's a lot of the interactivity. There's a lot of things that you can touch and press and interact with. But the core gameplay is very similar. You have your tank controls, aka Tomb Raider, and your very precision jumping. It's the same exact thing, really. You can jump, you can climb, you can cling to surfaces, and you equip your guns, and you can do like a 360 turn in the same way. It's got the same controls, or at least it does when I play it, because I map it that way. The only thing that they've really added, that I can tell that they've added, and it might be in Tomb Raider as well, is you can kind of do precision shots, very much like Resident Evil 4 actually, where you can go into sort of semi-first person or over the shoulder, and you use your gun sight to aim and fire, which is both useful and seems surprisingly ahead of its time, to be honest. The level design is good. There are lots of secrets, lots of verticality, and lots of things to find and do, and as the game goes on, usually that sort of thing dries up and it gets more vanilla, but it doesn't. And I mean, if you play this game, the first level alone, I think it would impress you just how many different environments you go through and how much there is to do and see. It's a really, I can't stop saying how impressive it is, but it's really good, and I'm surprised it didn't get like super high reviews and get remembered as an all-time classic for the system. I mean, I suppose the controls are a little bit stiff, but people seem to forgive that from Tomb Raider. I guess the distinction is that even Tomb Raider 2, which was really actiony, didn't quite get as much shooting as this, and it's also remarkably difficult, so my recommendation is for the first playthrough, genuinely put it on like baby mode. I think it's literally called Wussy, but that's the only way you're really probably going to make much headway the first time through, because even on normal it's hard. But yeah, tons of cool stuff, tons of hidden secrets and items, really some blocky but kind of impressive graphics, and yeah, it's a really good time, and I give it 5 out of 5, honestly. Great stuff.
Who wants some? Next.
Duke Nukem 0 Hour, released for the Nintendo 64 in 1999, is actually very similar to the previous game Time to Kill, but there's even more focus on shooting than there is in that one, and thanks to the N64 sort of analog, the controls are a little bit easier to use. If you play it on an emulator, you can set up a control system where you basically use a twin stick thing, much like you would any modern third-person or first-person shooter, which makes the game a lot more playable. Not that I had trouble really getting used to the N64 controls, but a lot of people did, and I do understand that. It's an extremely entertaining game. I don't like it quite as much as Time to Kill, if only because the level design just seems a little bit more... It's hard to explain, but because the controls are smoother, it feels like they've gone, well, if you can do combat a lot sort of simpler, then there's no real need to put much in besides combat, so a lot of the game is shooting. Although there is a decent sense of exploration to it as well. It's not completely lost that from Time to Kill. No, it's a very impressive game, and another impressive game in the Duke series, which is pretty sweet. I mean, I was incredibly pleasantly surprised just how good this series was, replaying them for this video, but, you know, we'll get into that as it goes on as well. Another nice effort, as is quite common in this series post-3D, to make the game world feel real. I mean, it's not real, it's a hugely exaggerated, you know, fake world, but they've tried to make sort of relatively convincing environments, and I kind of appreciate that. While they've retained the gameplay and level design without compromising that sense of, you know, oh, you are in a grimy sort of city area, which doesn't sound that impressive, but back in the day, you know, it was a little bit unusual to have a world that felt so real, and, you know, Duke Nukem 3D was the beginning of that, and the aesthetic going forward for the series was to retain that sort of feel, for now anyway. We'll get into this later. But no, Duke Nukem 0 Hour, really fun game, really good shooting, lots of weapons, lots of secrets that I literally couldn't find, so they're really well hidden because I looked everywhere. And yeah, really recommended, and another impressive game in the Duke Nukem franchise.
Detachable?
Duke Nukem for the Game Boy Color, also released in 1999, is very difficult to talk about because it's about as vanilla as a Game Boy Color game gets. Now, around this time, every single Game Boy Color game was a platformer like this, and there's some impressive stuff going on with the graphics and the sound in this game, but the gameplay, while it's definitely not bad, it is as utterly standard and formulaic as it could conceivably be. The level design is fine, you know, it's very, very straightforward though, so it's difficult to recommend because there are so many other platform games on the Game Boy Color that you could be playing, so I don't see why you would spend your money on this one, although I suppose in this current climate you wouldn't be spending your money anyway. So yeah, not a great game, not a bad game, very difficult to find anything to say about as a consequence. It's clearly based somewhat on Duke Nukem 2 with enemies and scenarios taken from it, but it doesn't actually manage even the quite rudimentary level of invention that Duke Nukem 2 did. So yeah, not an ideal game, not anything to say about this one.
What's up?
Duke, this area is secure.
Ideal for home defense.
Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, and yes, that is the real name of the game, for God's sake. They could have called it Planet of the Babes, and then it would have been a serviceable Planet of the Apes pun, but no, Land of the Babes. It's basically Time to Kill 2. I would argue that the level design is somewhat more lackluster even than something like, say, 0 Hour, which I didn't feel was lackluster, and I don't think that Planet of the... I'm calling it Planet of the Babes, even though that's not its name. Even though Land of the Babes isn't really lackluster either, it's just not quite as impressive as Time to Kill, in my opinion. The levels are a little bit too maze-like and complex, and while there was a lot of hidden stuff in Time to Kill, as there is in this, there's just a bit too much aimlessness going on in Land of the Babes. It's good, it's trashy, which I don't have a problem with, otherwise I wouldn't like Duke Nukem at all, and, you know, it's a fun time, but don't prioritise it over Time to Kill or 0 Hour.
Do to save women. It's my kind of town. This'll be a barrel of laughs.
Duke Nukem, the Manhattan Project, released for PC in 2002 and later on Xbox Live and Steam, is a remarkable throwback to his PC DOS shareware platformer roots. It's a side-scrolling game based on the feel of Duke Nukem 3D, and I came into this one again thinking this is gonna suck, and it resolutely doesn't. It's really fun and good. The level design is really, I don't know if I want to call it strong, but it's interesting, and there's so much to find again, so many little hidden areas and tucked in nooks and crannies and care that's gone into it. Being a 2.5D platformer, there's a few bits where the camera isn't exactly helpful, and some of the precision platforming is remarkably difficult even early on. It expects you to do some quite tricky jumping. It's actually better than the old DOS games even. I mean, and I love Duke Nukem 1, but I'd rather play this any day. It's great. It feels good, and it looks quite nice as well. I mean, not amazing, but especially for its time, and given the price it goes for now, it's really worth it, I think. Yeah, a really good side-scrolling game. And you know, I don't want all these reviews to basically be me going, this game doesn't suck, what's going on? But I want to point out now, before I get to it, that Duke Nukem Forever, being a bit of a stinker, seems to have created this idea that that was always the case, because, you know, Duke Nukem obviously is a sort of misogynist, sort of dinosaur character. Although, I mean, you could argue that, again, isn't the case, but still, he's come to represent something very unfortunate, because the gaming community has a big problem with, well, I say the gaming community, it's sort of all geek communities really, but, and the world at large, but for some reason it seems quite prominent in the gaming community, mainly because that's the one I kind of focus on, so obviously I'm going to see it. But there is a problem with the whole sort of toxic masculinity thing, and I said that in a tone that implies that I find it absurd, which isn't the case, but it's difficult to say without kind of going, sort of internally. But anyway, Duke Nukem kind of is that sort of archetype, but the problem is, he is a parody, and while it's fine, you've got to bear that in mind. You know, you can't really say to someone, no, this isn't offensive, or no, this isn't dumb, because it's a parody. It's not, you know, you have no right to feel what you're feeling about it. So I kind of get why Duke got sort of shit on and sidelined. It didn't help that Duke Nukem Forever was kind of poor, but it's a shame that the whole series kind of got buried with it, but at the same time, you know, it's of its time, so it kind of makes sense, you know. I personally like Duke Nukem, and I get the joke, but I don't expect that you necessarily... And by saying I get the joke, it sounds like I'm saying that if you don't find it funny, then there's something wrong with you, or you don't understand why it's supposed to be funny. But no, that's not the case. You know where I'm going with this. I don't want to get bogged down in it, but I thought I'd mention it now because it would come up sooner or later anyway. So, yeah, Manhattan Project. Really good game. Kind of dingy graphics, but that's kind of the Duke Nukem thing. It's meant, you know, it's like a dirty old city. That's always what they're going for. So, highly recommended. Definitely pick this one up. Duke Nukem Advance, released in 2002 for, guess what, the Game Boy Advance, is a bit of an achievement. It's a... GBA had a fair few FPSs, stuff like Backtrack and X vs. Sever, and I believe there was a Medal of Honor as well, and on top of that, there was sort of ports of Doom 1 and 2. But Duke Nukem Advance, I think, might be the best of them, because Doom 1 and 2, while they were good ports, the game just frankly wasn't made for that kind of control scheme, and Duke Nukem Advance has been designed from scratch for the Advance, so it feels decent, it feels right, and it's a good little game, and I wouldn't, recommend playing an FPS on the GBA, especially, but if you had to play one, I'd say probably check this one out. It takes, obviously, its cues from Duke 3D, but again, cut down, obviously, but no, it's not bad at all. There's a surprising, you move around, you strafe, you jump, you shoot, and it all just feels, fine, and most GBA FPSs can't even manage that, so, yeah, not at all bad.
Hail to the king, baby.
Hero.
Oh yeah, it's good to be king.
And then a big 9-year gap before we got Duke Nukem Critical Mass on the DS in 2011, which is a really, really bad game that takes the basic feel of the Manhattan Project, but just arses everything up with awkward controls and a viewpoint that's way too zoomed in, and just too many mechanics crammed into one game. And it's not horrible. It's not horrible. I mean, you could probably have some fun with it. It's just a awkward feeling, weird looking, kind of ugly game that really doesn't bring anything to the table. And all its new ideas are bad, and all its old ideas aren't as good as they were originally, so not really a whole lot of point, unfortunately. No, nothing much to say about this one. Don't buy it. It's quite hard to find, actually. It was a really late release for the DS, and it was heavily delayed. I probably wouldn't have bothered releasing it if I were them.
A pair of boots.
Duke, we've got your green power armor over here and ready to go.
Power armor is for pussies.
Well, okay. You want a gun instead?
2011's Duke Nukem Forever is both not as bad as everyone says it is, and much worse than you could possibly imagine. Since 1996, though it was announced in 97, which means its sort of protracted development time was essentially an industry joke, and sort of, rightly so to some degree. The game that was shown in the late 90s, early 2000s was resolutely not the same game as the one that eventually came out. It was originally under development at 3D Realms, and then I believe in 2009 3D Realms went under, and about a year later it was announced that Gearbox were developing the game, and there is a superficial resemblance to the original trailers and such in the final game, but it's very generic, and they've made it so that you can only carry a few weapons, and they've really cut back on the interactivity that made this sort of series, that put it on the map, really. While there is sort of comedy stuff you can interact with, it's done sort of for a purpose now. It gives you health, which you'd think would be a good improvement, but in a way it takes away from the just knockabout fun of it when there's an actual reason for this stuff. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but that's the kind of mad opinions you're going to get when you consume content I have made, I'm afraid. So no, not a good game, not a completely horrible one. It has a couple of high points, but largely it's just a generic first-person shooter that really Duke doesn't deserve. So no, not recommended.
Looks like you're fucked.
Jesus Christ, please ban this game.
Fucking with an alien.
Help. Help me. Please. The pain.
God damn, what's wrong with your face? Kaboom, baby.
Duke Nukem turned up again this year, somewhat unexpectedly, in the re-release of Bulletstorm, titled Bulletstorm Full Clip Edition. Oh, by the way, this year is 2017, in case you're watching this next year or the year after. Probably not the year after that, because YouTube is going to go under, but still. Anyway, yeah, in Bulletstorm Full Clip Edition, for some reason, you can play as Duke Nukem. And amusingly enough, they haven't actually re-recorded the dialogue, so characters still call you Gray or Grayson, to which Duke often responds along the lines of, "That's not my name is Duke," like for the whole game, which is really odd. But, you know, I'm not going to talk about it at length because Bulletstorm is not a Duke Nukem game, but it is an excellent game. It's a really good game, and I would recommend it to anyone. And, you know, the bonus Duke Nukem mode, despite adding fundamentally nothing gameplay-wise, is kind of an amusing, you know, non sequitur, amusing bit of extra content. So, yeah, that was the last time we saw Duke. And that's it. That's the Duke Nukem series to the best of my knowledge. Thank you very much for watching. Quick update, I'm hoping to have Video World come back in September, but we'll see how it goes because working with collaborators can be quite difficult sometimes. I have lots of it written already, so it's pretty much ready to come back. I just need a few things and I'll be good to go. So again, thanks for watching. There may be another Franchise and Lows or something similar next month. There will always be a video every month, more or less. Or at least in each month at some stage. Can't promise exactly when. But no, again, thank you very much, and stay tuned.